Hey there. Hey, Cohort 9. This live lecture is specifically for you. So, I am, this is take 6 for me. So, super fun. And I am so grateful for your patience in getting this up. Yeah, with audio. So that's been tested again, and hopefully it will work this time. Just so you know, I am not in my normal office space. We're getting creative and resourceful and relational this morning, and I have a baby. She's 5, so I guess she's not a baby anymore, but I have a 5-year-old sleeping here, and many people getting breakfast outside the door. So if anything needs to be paused during this, that's what that's about. It shouldn't affect you much, except that I might look a little jerky. So let's get going on this experience-assisted coaching, shall we? Yes. So experience-assisted coaching is something that Lark is the best at in the world, which is kind of crazy for me to say and think, but we are, and that's awesome. Also, we really want more and more and more people to start using experience-assisted coaching because of how powerful it is and how efficient it is at getting people to where they want to be from where they are. So right now, there are a couple of other programs that you can go and become certified specifically in equine coaching. You need another certification in coaching before you go and do that. It's kind of like an advanced specialization, like some systems coach training is. But there isn't currently any other training program in the world that offers experience-assisted coaching in its basic certification. And so we're really, really proud of that and really excited that you've chosen us to do that with. That was pause number 1. So in this lecture, we're going to go over our definition for experience-assisted coaching. We're going to quickly review the experiential learning model and the process coaching pathway. And then we'll talk a little bit about brain, body, and genomic stuff, and finish up with some synthesis and application. So no matter who you are or what your background is, experience matters, right? So an experience matters, or your experience matters. It's a huge way that we learn and remember. If you do a Google search for quotes about experience, everyone has different opinions on experience and what it brings us, whether it's beautiful or brilliant or brutal or bad or alliteration. However someone might describe it, whether experience is a hardship or a challenge, or it's something that you should be fully present in and engage because you're alive. All of it, all of the quotes, all of the ideas around experience come together to say that it matters and it's a way that we gain wisdom. So that's one reason that we want to focus on not just a singular kind of experience like equine or just art or just music, but what are all the different possibilities of those third things that we can incorporate into coaching to create an experience that both matters and creates wisdom in our clients that will lead to motivating forward movement. So our definition is that experience-assisted coaching is a professional approach and practice that partners with the client and coach and the process of a present concrete experience to co-create awareness, insight, and new habit formation. So you guys already know about the partnership between a client and a coach. This is both an approach and a practice. So we do it again and again, and we get better and better as we do it. But the process of a present concrete experience is really important. So it's present, meaning it's happening right now, and it's concrete. So it's not a metaphor that's just happening in someone's head. It's something that they can see or feel or smell or experience or emote around that's with them. So say with art, you create the art ahead of time and then you do the coaching afterwards. That's fine because you still have that third thing presently. It's still concrete and in front of you presently. What would not be experience-assisted coaching is if you, say, did some art with a client or had some client do some art and they left it at home and they explained it to you and there was no way for you to interact with it or add to it or subtract from it or manipulate it in any way, cut it up, turn it around. That's not experience-assisted coaching. Say you have a client go and listen to some music and then come back with what they've learned. That's not experience-assisted coaching. However, if you play music while you're with a client and have them embody that music somehow or what they value as they listen to the music, or they can identify what lines are motivating to them or create passion in them or whatever, that then can be experience-assisted coaching. The experience co-creates awareness, insight, and new habit formation. So there's always awareness around naming. Then there's insight that comes through discovery and new habit formation that comes from forwarding action. So I'm always asking before the end of an experience-assisted coaching session, what do you want to do with this? So for example, with the art, you always get to a point where, what do you want to do with this piece of art? Do we want to throw it away? Do we want to cut it up? Do we want to honor it? Do we want to frame it? Do we want to put it in our journal? Right? Do we want to make more of it? With the horses, for example, what do we want to do with it, this name tag that we have, or the it that is the it that is the horse? Maybe we've named our topic, right? And how we continue that learning and be held accountable for that in the future. That starts to create those new habits. So you guys have learned already about Kolb's experiential learning model. We have this concrete experience. We do or have it with our client. Then we enter into reflective observation together by reviewing and reflecting on the experience. This is where a lot of exploration happens through curious questions, articulating what's going on, meta view, making distinctions, all of that sort of thing. Reflective observation happens. Then some new energy pops out and we're like, the aha moment, or okay, or this level of motivation or insight, and that results in abstract conceptualization or concluding their learning from the experience. When they have that conclusion, then they move into active experimentation, which is planning, trying out what you've learned. This includes brainstorming. Brainstorming can happen kind of in abstract conceptualization too, but brainstorming, requesting, challenging, championing, accountability, all of those sorts of coaching skills can be used in active experimentation. And then as they try this again, they have another concrete experience. However, that usually happens in between your sessions then. So I think you guys can probably already see how this integrates really well with process coaching from your coactive coaching text. Just as a review, you can find this in your book, but the way that process coaching works is you have some sort of turbulence. It can be resonance, dissonance, distraction. But the coach hears the turbulence, and with the client, they name it together. Like we talked about before, naming the topic or naming the turbulence is so important because it does two things. When you name something, it gives it agency, which means you can choose around it. The other thing is that it gives it memory. So until you make a judgment about something, and naming it is making a judgment about it, until you make a judgment about something and name it, it is very difficult to remember. So making a judgment, moving forward with that judgment, exploring that judgment, is what seals things into our memory. Then you explore the it that you've named. The client experiences it. A shift happens, energy opens up, and the client has access to new resources. Then movement begins to happen. So here's an example from my experience as a client. The example I'm going to give you is not from an experience-assisted session, but just from a process-focused session. When I was in my coach training program, I did not understand process coaching at all. It felt very muddy to me and not very clear. And the whole dancing in this moment thing was like, are you kidding me? I just want to know what to do and how to do it right. And so I hired a few different coaches at different points and specifically asked them to do process coaching with me as a client so that I would be able to get clear around it. Almost all of the process coaching I had done, the turbulence was some sort of emotion that felt negative to me, or an experience that felt really negative, that I wanted to overcome somehow because I was resisting it or had fear around it. Things like waste and defeat and even like insignificance, like you guys saw me experience at our on-site. But in this one particular session, I was really trying to figure out how to navigate the transition of a job I had been in for about 5 years. And the people that I worked with in that job had been investing in my life even before that. So I was really conflicted about how to leave and how to do that well, because it was the first job that I had been invested in that way, and was leaving, because I was choosing something else that wasn't just the next step, So my coach heard my topic and heard what was going on, and together we named the thing I was struggling with was gratitude, which was very different for me to process around, and that's why I want to use it as an example. But it wasn't that I couldn't figure out how to transition. I knew that was the right decision, and I knew what was next for me, but I couldn't figure out how to express the immense, like overwhelming amount of gratitude I had for the people that I worked with there. And I mean, it was unreal how much I appreciated them. And there was I didn't have enough money to take them all out or get there was just no way to pay them back. So we explored that gratitude, what color it was, how heavy it was, when it came up, when it drew out emotion in me. I experienced that gratitude and the emotion that came with it. I mean, ugly cried about gratitude. Also just was really calm around it too. And then the shift happens, right? And the coach can't predict when the shift is going to happen, and there's no timeline for it. But if you are really intentional about exploring and experiencing in this moment with the client, the shift will happen faster. You can't jump in and out of the experience or in and out of the moment and expect the shift to happen. So the shift happens where all of a sudden it's not necessarily about my resistance or my inadequacy at expressing gratitude. It's I have to express gratitude. Like, I have to do it in some way. And so energy opens up around that. I, as the client, had access to a whole bunch of new resources creatively because I went from I don't know to this has to happen. And I realized that I had resources in my creativity and in my craft room and in my phone and in my computer. And so my commitment then was to create a piece of art with a letter specifically to the one person that I had the most gratitude for, and to present him with that. And so I did, and the movement happened. If we can go back to all the way at the beginning, where you guys listened to Dan Pink's TED Talk about autonomy and mastery and purpose, all of those things were involved in me creating this expression of gratitude. I was really good. I have great handwriting and really good perspective on individual gifts and design and stuff. I could do it on my own in a way that was expressive and personal, and it was incredibly purposeful for me. So that's why the movement starts to happen, and energy opens up, because we've now put power essentially back in the client's hands to navigate around to choose around it, because they have experienced it now without resisting. So anyway, that's the process coaching pathway. And you can see how when you're in a concrete experience, you start to name it, then through reflective observation, you explore it and the client experiences it. When the shift happens and energy opens up, that's abstract conceptualization, where the client has access to new resources and can conclude they're learning from the experience. And then when movement happens, that's when we enter into active experimentation. So then we've got this brain stuff, right? We have the theory that we've looked at so far, and then this is some of the science in a very, very simplified, condensed form. So this diagram is actually from a book called Your Fantastic Elastic Brain. It's a fantastic book for kids. You identify these five different areas of your brain, and how you can set goals for each area and make those areas stronger. And that's what we're going to use too. So there are these five different areas: the prefrontal cortex, cerebrum, hippocampus, cerebellum, and amygdala. Your cerebrum has that blue part has a whole bunch of stuff going on with sensory, impact language, memory, lots of different things, connection, relationship, lots of things going on in your cerebrum. But the five areas we want to focus. So that's a whole lot. Know that a whole lot of processing is going on in your cerebrum, but it's not conscious processing. So for example, you've got language is in an area of your cerebrum, but you're not thinking about the words that you are saying. You are expressing thoughts, but the actual conversion of those thoughts into language you're not conscious of. That's happening subconsciously, and some other stuff is even happening unconsciously. So, but your conscious processing, that's all happening in your prefrontal cortex. So you can see there's limited capacity for that in comparison to the rest of your cerebrum. Your prefrontal cortex is where you're processing creative options, decision-making, how you want to express emotion that you're feeling, how you want to connect with someone, all of that is happening in your prefrontal cortex, which is essentially you deciding on a daily basis what you want to do and where you want to go. Very present. You can also use your prefrontal cortex to imagine the future and connect it to memory about your past, but it's always your conscious processing. All right, so then you've got your hippocampus, that green part, and that's where memory is stored, more long-term memory. And like if you're trying to remember something on a test, that sort of thing, once it's secured in your memory, it's stored in your hippocampus. And then your cerebellum is in charge of balance and coordination in your body for the most part. And then your amygdala, that little yellow part, is where emotional impulse is happening. It's where basically your brain interprets if something is a safe situation or not, and then decides, then the rest of your brain works together to decide how to respond to that threatening or unsafe situation. And almost always the amygdala is the one that says, okay, here's the stimuli, and also here's the emotional output that goes with that stimuli. And those are there are 6 universal emotions in the amygdala, or that happen because of those stimuli: surprise, sadness, fear, anger, happiness or joy, and disgust. So that's what's going on in your brain. For coaching, we're obviously using all of our brain, but for insight and new habit creation, we have to be able to have access to our prefrontal cortex. Have to. If we don't, then we can't reach the goal of coaching. We can't reach insight and new habit creation. So what happens is if our amygdala overrides our PFC, or if our cerebrum is saying, no, you need to actually focus more on this level of conscious processing because you haven't created it into a habit that can be stored in your cerebrum yet, or your hippocampus, then we're using up the capacity in our prefrontal cortex for other things, sometimes unnecessarily, all right? We want as much access to that prefrontal cortex in coaching as possible. Okay, body stuff. So there's one nerve called your vagus nerve, and a ton of work has been done on your vagus nerve and muscle and cellular memory and trauma by Dr. Stephen Porges, who you can read a whole bunch of his stuff. But the basic idea is there's one nerve that runs from your brain through your entire body, and you can see it here, all of the branches of the vagus nerve. Vagus nerve touches on every single major organ in your body: lungs, heart, bronchial tubes, sinus nerve, bladder, liver, kidneys, stomach, intestines, reproductive organs, all of that. And so your vagus nerve actually picks up on what's going on in your heart that has that huge electromagnetic field. Your heart, your lungs, basically your autonomic nervous system, those things that happen in you automatically: breathing, heart rate, digestion, arousal, all of that. And before your prefrontal cortex gets a chance to process, your vagus nerve has already sent information to your brain about your heart rate, about your breathing, about your secretion of different hormones and enzymes and things like that, and has said essentially to your amygdala, and to other parts of your midbrain, this is a threatening situation or this is a safe situation. So here's how he describes it. The detection of a person as safe or dangerous, or an experience or environment as safe or dangerous, triggers neurobiologically determined pro-social or defense behaviors. So if it's a safe environment and rewarding, that triggers pro-social things. You start leaning forward, leaning toward trying to connect, right? But if it's not, if it's threatening, you start leaning away, becoming defensive, avoiding, resisting, that sort of thing. Even though we may not always be aware of danger on a cognitive level, on a neurophysiological level, our body has already started a sequence of neural processes that would facilitate adaptive defense behaviors such as fight, flight, or freeze. You guys can remember this from that pain or pressure exercise that we did at Rains and Rainbows. When someone is approaching you from a confrontational or stop zone, your heart rate starts beating faster, you get warmer, your breathing changes, and your stomach might even get tight, right, or heavy. And all of that that's happening in your body is telling your brain something that you might not be consciously processing yet, right? So just realize that this is one of the reasons why it's so important to coach the whole person and articulate what's going on when you see it. So when you see that their heart, like that their face is flushing, or that they seem uncomfortable, or that they're looking away from you, or that they're fidgeting, right? Articulate what's going on. Or when you notice that's happening in you because you're realizing that you feel threatened as a coach, right? Or you might not even know why, but you just know, like, all of a sudden you just felt this like thing drop in your gut. When you and your client can co-create together around that thing that drops in your gut, you can start to understand why something is threatening, name that, and move past it, rather than just and only listening to those autonomic responses. All right, so this is the last one, and this is the stuff that I probably have the most difficult time explaining. So I want you to check out Barbara Fredrickson and Steve Cole's article on functional genomic perspective on well-being. You can just Google it. Steve Cole, functional genomic perspective on well-being. There's a PDF, a free PDF of a summary of the work that they've done. Basically, Steve Cole has studied the human genome and it's what promotes or creates disease and dying and suffering in humans. And then Barbara Fredrickson is one of the leading positive psychology scientists in the world. She operates out of the University of Pennsylvania and their Masters of Positive Psychology program there. So they got together, and Steve was like, what if we studied the other side of this? If inflammation, if stress and trauma and many, many other things we know lead to inflammation and autoimmune responses, which then leads to suffering and disease and death. Is there a way for us to do the opposite, to find out what reduces stress, what creates life, essentially aliveness, and can that turn the pin on inflammation and autoimmune disease so that people actually start living longer as a result? And he found that it does. So it's incredible science and really impacting to where we're at, just humanity in general, as we try to figure out humanity, basically, and how to live well. So this CTRA gene composite, that is basically a combination of genetic markers that they know they can look at. And if this CTRA gene composite has been activated or flipped on, the switch has been flipped on, then that means inflammation, autoimmune responses, like negative autoimmune responses, which then leads to all sorts of different diseases and syndromes and things. So they took about 80 healthy adults. So 80 healthy adults, and studied as they just endured normal life and stressful events and things like that that would trigger this inflammation response. They put them through a series of interventions at different dosages for hedonic and eudaimonic well-being. Hedonic well-being is just looking at the feeling of happiness and positivity and making sure that that is coming up in you on a regular basis. Just a second. And eudaimonic well-being focuses on well-being around purpose, fulfillment, so not necessarily happy feeling, but knowing you are well because what you are doing matters and you're doing it because you choose to do it and that sort of thing. So they found that the hedonic interventions did very, very little to impact the gene composite, but the eudaimonic made a huge, huge difference. And you can see that here. There's a much, much better explanation in, there's much, much better, just a second, but explanation of this in the article that I referred you to. I told you all that would happen. I told you. All right, so last slide. If we put this all together, we know that our brain has an organizing principle where it moves away from threat and toward reward. The ways that we identify threat are through uncertainty, realizing that we're focused on a problem we avoid, like move away from. We get really tunnel vision-y. There are certain emotions that promote tunnel vision as well, like anger, surprise, disgust. Those things promote tunnel vision, more data focused and disengaged, whereas the things that promote this reward or toward state are interest, solution, being focused on a solution, approaching something because it's not threatening or because that you know you have more power, having a global view, getting connection, and being engaged. So with all of this in mind, the conclusion is that we have limited conscious processing in our prefrontal cortex, and successful coaching taps into the unconscious brain through insight and intuition, right? All those things that are happening in the amygdala and the hippocampus and your cerebrum, we actually have access to them through an experience, through emotion, when usually we would just have access to this part if you were just sitting down and talking with someone. But through movement, through emotion, through a third thing experience, we're actually able to tap into the unconscious brain and all of the resources that we have there. This helps a client create new habits so that the PFC is freed up even more in their daily living to consciously process new things, to see the world in new ways. So we usually come up against this impasse where we would decide, is this a threat or a reward? If we can move past the impasse, then that leads to insight, which leads to new action because we're motivated. And then those actions lead to new habits. So when you're doing experience-assisted coaching, the brain state required for insight, or to move past that impasse, to move past the away state, to move past or manage or calm down everything your vagus nerve is trying to tell you is a quiet brain, one that's inward looking, slightly happy, which we know from the genomic research doesn't just mean a positive emotion, it means a eudaimonic state, knowing that what you are doing and why you're choosing to do it matter and you're fulfilled around that, and then not working directly on a problem, which we've talked about as well. So experience-assisted coaching facilitates insight by creating this toward state for us as coaches, and that's why we can make so much progress in such a short period of time. And it almost feels like whiplash sometimes when you're going through experience-assisted coaching. So give yourself and your clients grace, because you're not used to, your brain isn't used to, your whole body isn't used to, even at a cellular level, you creating that much insight and action in such a short period of time. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means you're not used to it. and it can be a little bit jarring, but also really, really good. So that's what I've got for you in the Experience Assisted lecture. Cannot wait to see you guys again for systems coaching in a couple weeks.